sequential process, moving from one phase to the next. So uh, it provided a lot of structure, but there's really a high time to market, which means it takes a while to actually receive the value that you're developing, right? And then often uh, in technology, things change. And so with waterfall, it isn't very fluid in that you can make changes. It's not agile at all, right? And so during the 90s, uh, Scrum and Kanban and really Agile began to flourish. And it really was around the time of the dot-com boom, right? Where the technology started to drive the business processes and services. And so now that we're using Agile to more quickly deploy services, we need now a better tool and process to um, deliver those services. So while Agile allowed us to continuously iterate through those development and testing software needs, uh, it really was intended to replace waterfall completely. Now, DevOps, on the other hand, really is intended to work alongside Agile. And so it's important for you guys to really understand that in most of the Fortune 500 organizations, they're going to be using some form of Agile, right? So it's important to learn what Agile is in depth. I know the series that Josh brought to us last week really talked through in detail what some of those concepts were. So definitely look into that presentation and have a better understanding of how Agile, some of the pros and cons of Agile here that we list, and then also in DevOps, how they apply to deploying the CI/CD pipelines, which you'll learn today. All right. So, it's it's really fitting again that we're having that conversation. And Josh, I believe that meeting last week has how agility is changing the role of project management, because DevOps is really an offspring of Agile software development, and so it was born out of the need to keep up with that increased software velocity. So many of the advancements in the last decade, looking at the slide before, you'll see that Agile development has really achieved and exposed some of the needs for a more of a holistic approach to end-to-end software development. And so when we say Agile development, it's really an umbrella term. So when you hear the term this evening, think of mostly the Scrum or Kanban methodologies, lean or extreme programming. And so that push again from waterfall to Agile really birthed the DevOps process or mindset, if you will. And so you'll see that DevOps, when we use DevOps, we attempt to solve some of those challenges that we faced and speeding up that development. So what DevOps really means is that there are really no walls or gates or transitions that we typically see in organizations that are using waterfall and going from stages or phases to phases. Whereas it's a more iterative approach with DevOps, and both the developer and the operations, as you'll see in future slides, they participate in that process of software delivery. Now, historically, let's talk a little bit about what a developer and a QA roles are for a moment. Mostly developers use a process called test-driven development, which essentially is where you're writing tests before you're actually developing the software. And so you're not releasing that software until those tests actually pass. So it's one of those strategies that we've been really using as developers for quite some time. And what we really want to do is in DevOps, apply some of those concepts to infrastructure as well. So for a developer, this does really a couple things. It allows for them to move more quickly because, again, if I am creating the test while I'm writing the code, uh, I can essentially deploy that software quicker, given that the tests are included in that delivery process. So it would be synonymous with a production pipeline of cars and ensuring that all of the components that I'm putting in the car are properly tested before I'm delivering it um, through that pipeline. Any questions so far? All right. So this also allowed for the developer to create better programs and really a higher code quality. So that's even the software that's delivered on your phones today, it's been thoroughly tested through a delivery pipeline or process before it actually reaches your phone for you to do some or perform some work or play a game, right? When you're thinking about CI/CD and DevOps, think about ways to that we're automating the process of delivering software to your phone or to an environment when we're thinking about true Fortune 500 companies. So historically, managing IT infrastructure was really a manual process, and unfortunately, this picture here is a true picture of a data center where applications would essentially be deployed on the machines that an infrastructure engineer would plug into in a data center into an environment and have to essentially wire up a system. And so this manual process that really happened before the 90s or 2000s really has been replaced with cloud provisioning and cloud environments. And this allows us to save on cost, right? Increase our ability to scale so we can deploy more services now. We don't have to wait on an engineer to plug in a system and install some software and then install another application that allows for the development team to validate that everything is working properly. So we know that everyone needs infrastructure. And so what DevOps attempts to do is to allow the developers to create infrastructure so that they can move even faster. Does that make sense, anyone? And I know some of us have joined. Again, I'll send out the presentation after the meeting. But again, we're wanting to talk through what CI/CD is and how automation through DevOps pipelines can be achieved through software delivery. So here's an example of a software delivery or a development workflow. The developer would essentially write the code and then create or push their changes via some what we call a pull request. So if you can imagine, code is really software that is written as a text file. And so when I update this text file, similar to I'm updating a Google Doc, I want to essentially kick off the tests that need to be performed before I send this file to my manager, for instance. So that's essentially what we're doing in the software process is essentially certifying the components of the software before we're delivering it to our customers. And so here again is an example of a process sort of using waterfall, and you can see that they're very much so some time-consuming processes, right? So those time-consuming processes are those that are manual, where we actually have a human performing some work. So, actually deploying to a dev environment, installing software, purchasing that software, configuring that environment, right? Updating that environment. So what again DevOps attempts to do is really focus on those areas that are long hauls, if you will, in the process, and that are time consuming. Uh, we attempt to automate those processes through our delivery. So before it will look something like this, and then afterwards, we are looking to remove the manual processes so that we can get to our goal faster, which is deploying to production. Now, this allows really for more consistent or more quality product. Um, and a lot of people wonder why Apple, a lot of their software is developed so well, and it really comes down to the testing. And really ensuring that you are running either automated tests, regression tests, tests that ensure that the software doesn't break previous builds or break previous releases that may have been certified before. Any questions so far?
It's a good info.
No, great. Thanks for that feedback. All right. So again, we want to bake a lot of those components into that delivery process. And so as you can see from the previous slide, that's, removing those components, we're replacing them with some level of automation. So we're still performing those same steps that are required to release our software. But we want to automate the components so that we don't have to manually perform those tests each and every time. And if you think about it, there are, hundreds and thousands of pieces of software that companies and organizations manage. And so you could see how cumbersome that could be if they were doing so manually. So the DevOps handbook, which is written by Gene Kim, who is one of the DevOps evangelists, which I'd recommend. He talks about the definition of what DevOps is. And he says it's the combination of cultural philosophies, practices, and tools that increase an organization's ability to deliver applications and services at a high velocity. And that's really at the crux of what DevOps is. And what it's not is it's not a new tool, right? So there's not a tool that provides all of what DevOps is trying to accomplish. And while the DevOps community has created a lot of cool tools, and many of the tools that DevOps recommend can't be done without, or the processes and standardizations, they can't be done without tools. The tools themselves don't mean that you're achieving DevOps. And so as it is referred, DevOps allows the collaboration of dev and the IT ops divisions to collaborate and achieve the goals that they would have normally done in their separate silos. All right. So you have to, there are organizations that often say, we have a DevOps team. And usually that is an inclination that they may not be doing DevOps in the right way, because again, we still are going back to the sort of waterfall process where we're handing off work from one team to the other. So what we really want and what we work with organizations with here at Matrix is for everyone to be following a DevOps type strategy, similar to Agile, right? Or similar to security. We want to ensure that everybody is applying the same level of security and compliance when releasing software and not necessarily relying on a security and compliance team. So DevOps is the same way. And again, this approach can be performed at a software or an infrastructure delivery level. It's not a new role. Again, the DevOps engineers, or you'll find that there are developers who perform DevOps methodologies, right, within those confines on a daily, but they may not necessarily have the title of a DevOps engineer. So definitely better understand what is encompassing in the role, and not necessarily get hung up on the actual position when it comes to whether an organization is actually doing DevOps or performing DevOps in the right way.
Can I jump in and ask you a question? And I think Demetrius also just posted about DevSecOps. But one of my questions to you, Breon, from your experience, if you dealt with an organization that predominantly followed that waterfall approach, I would say, and that's historically just what the employees kind of leaned on, when they're trying to transition into more of that product model and utilize, kind of that self-sufficient team approach, what would you recommend as some strategies that they can employ so they're not really leaning on, hey, I have a security team, I have a DevOps team, and that work is kind of being handled from one group? Like what's some tidbits that you can share in regards to that? Because I know even at State Farm, with us recently going into the product model for more of that project structure, I see that as being one of the challenges. We're still siloed into teams.
Right. And that's really a challenge that isn't unique to your organization. And it really starts at a leadership level, unfortunately. And I should say it could start at a grassroots level, but leadership will definitely need to buy into this process because it usually requires some level of budget. But it definitely, what I would recommend is really evaluating from a cultural perspective whether or not the organization is ready to take on some of what is recommended in the DevOps standards and principles or methodologies. And then from there, actually working with possibly a vendor, bringing them in to provide an assessment to better understand where some of those shortcomings are. From a training perspective, maybe there is a flux of tools that are used or where we could provide some level of standards, or simply migrating from one platform to another, right? But again, if and I warn a lot of my customers with this as well, when we start some of these transformations, we may not end with all of the resources that we began with. And so it's important to understand that there may be personnel changes that need to happen in order to achieve some of our goals. So I definitely recommend starting with your management and provide them with some insight on how this level of innovation can help streamline or better propel your organization forward. And then from there, sort of strategize on, what the best steps forward are.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I will say this to the audience. I didn't mention this at the beginning, but BDPA Atlanta is a talk back to me type of culture. So we encourage you to ask questions, receive clarity on anything that our experts can help you out with. that's how we grow together and learn together. So I encourage you all, as much as possible, feel free to unmute if you can, and ask any questions to our experts that may be of value to you. I do see another question in here, Breon, more so in regards to the topic. So in what you've been doing in different companies that you've engaged, do you see this being a trend that's happening now where more companies are going to this product structure?
Absolutely. And I would say both Agile and DevOps. I believe there was a Gartner report that by 2024, that 85% of the Fortune 500 companies will be moving to Agile or moving forward with some form of DevOps. You know, all other organizations really fall in line with what those companies do. And I would say that the top 1 through 5 are all, all in on Agile and DevOps. So it's definitely a trend. Obviously, as things progress, right? Especially given where we are with COVID, um, you know, there may be more capable processes that are developed in the future, but they would likely, essentially be connected to some form of Agile or DevOps. And so I think definitely it's something that you'd be, uh, you know, uh, you want to definitely invest in sooner than later. Um, and so I'd recommend it, Agile or DevOps.
Hey, Brian, this is Demetrius Williams.
Mhm.
Hey, just a quick comment or question for you as well. So it just feels like this is more of a mindset shift in
Mhm.
terms of how the teams are working, the product team and DevOps working that to actually deliver value quicker by them all working
Mhm.
together, but instead of working in silos like they
Right.
once did at one time. So you're constantly getting
Mhm.
that feedback and helping DevOps to move quicker. So,
Absolutely. And that really is a great segue into, how those silos, right, are really broken down. And so with the customer working with us on the delivery process, that feedback loop is shortened. And so thus, if there are issues, we are discovering them much earlier in the process. And thus we can send out those updates that are needed to fix those issues in a more streamlined way, and we release a more quality product. Now, another good example, and I know a lot of um, you guys probably use Facebook, but they actually encourage a lot of user feedback, and so you can get a part or be a part of a lot of the pilot groups, and that's really an example of the Facebook engineering team using CI/CD to their advantage, which we'll talk about a little more. But again, if you have a real live customer providing feedback, you can see how you could create a more quality product because, again, you're able to fix any bugs or any issues before they're reaching the masses. Does that make sense?
yeah, just to add on that, Brian, I think to your point earlier, that's that test-driven development is actually going to help you with that as well, catching those bugs before they get into the customer's hands.
Absolutely.
And regression testing, and for developers introducing um, new features that may break other features. So
Correct. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. So now let's talk a little bit about some of the components of DevOps and the infamous DevOps pipeline. So continuous integration allows for developers to work together seamlessly on the same code base. So again, the reference that I talked to you earlier, and for those of us who are actually developers and more experienced, really just using this example to draw home like what actually is going on. But imagine, collaborating on a Google Doc, right? And again, we want to ensure that all the changes that are made, which acts as a code base, are essentially going through the proper checks before we're sending this document off to be fully vetted by the customer. And so those changes in the software and those components that are required to package it, that is what essentially continuous integration is. And it really works alongside of Agile in the planning phase. So again, whenever you hear Agile, you know, it's not necessarily I should say it works alongside of DevOps, whereas Agile previously replaced waterfall. DevOps isn't intended to replace Agile at all. And so that's why I said, and previously, speaking to the gentleman that asked the question, it's really a good investment either way with Agile and DevOps. Obviously, if you're more technical, definitely try to go the DevOps route. And I'll leave some material here that you can definitely read. And from a project management perspective, Agile as well would definitely be advantageous for you to invest in your future in.
Hey, Brian, there was a question that came in the chat. It said from Stephanie, do you find that getting developer buy-in for implementing DevOps is challenging?
No, absolutely. Actually, the developers usually are already bought in, given that the process for releasing software in general has always been to include test-driven development and include processes to certify the delivery of my software, right? I find that a lot of the challenge comes from an organization standpoint, from the infrastructure side, because they're used to sort of having their hands, or operations, right, having their hands on some of those components. And with DevOps, you're sort of sharing that responsibility now. Does that answer your question? Hopefully.
Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
Excellent. So continuous delivery, or CD, focuses on the automated deployment or transfer or software to a given environment. So think test, QA, or prod when we're talking about environments. So the ultimate goal of CD is to bring software to production at the touch of a button. So the tests that are performed automatically, they're performed immediately after the development is completed. So the developer gets the feedback immediately with DevOps, opposed to, in some cases, where you send out a development change and it takes maybe 2 or 3 weeks to go through some change control process. So at the point of me actually releasing the software, it's now broken because it's 2 weeks later, right, that this software is being delivered. So it's really important that, and which is why, again, software developers really love DevOps, because they can thrive in it because they have full control. And so Agile, again, is intended to work alongside of DevOps throughout the deployment process. Any questions? Any other questions? And I apologize. I guess as the presenter, I'm not able to see some of the chat. So definitely, JV, if you can keep any questions coming, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Victor and I will keep you up to date.
Cool. All right. So again, continuous integration is the software development practice of regularly integrating that code or those changes to some shared repository. So, this usually would happen like once or several times a day, but with DevOps, we can release software thousands of times a day. And so each commit, and when a developer makes a change to some code or some file in the code, that commit triggers a build. And that build essentially runs through some testing pipeline in an automated fashion. And this can really help identify if anything is broken or if any changes are needed before we're actually releasing that to our customers. And so continuous deployment is a process to deploy the code in production through that testing pipeline. So while continuous delivery enables DevOps teams to be ready to really deliver anytime to production. So that's essentially that push button delivery method is what allows you to, or is what continuous deployment allows for you to provide to your customers. And now it's important to understand that many companies, they mistake continuous deployment for continuous delivery. And so because of that, they sort of mishandle some of the terms and even creating the pipeline. So continuous delivery provides the control over the functionality and the rollout of the product, right? So continuous deployment is really just that business decision to release this product. So you really want to focus on automating that entire process so that once again the developer is done with their software updates, or if release software to fix some broken item, you want them to have the ability to release it to that production environment, but also ensuring that it's quality code by running through the proper tests. And interesting in CI/CD, it definitely lowers the staff costs through cost avoidance. So developers or SREs or even admins, they save time because they avoid manual tasks that can lead to mistakes. So I know you guys probably heard the term of fat finger. Well, this happens on a daily. And so with these processes, if you're automating sort of automating the automation delivery pipeline, you're able to then ensure that there are no issues when I'm deploying to an environment. And even if there are, I have the ability to have a stopgap in that process before it's released. So it improves operation performance. And that really boosts confidence, really, from a software development standpoint or infrastructure development. And that really boosts your service level. So it's not a coincidence that the leading organizations are more innovative and more technically sound, nowadays. So with continuous delivery, if you have the proper debugging tools in place, they can pinpoint those issues and remediate them quickly. Yep.
Hey,
so
Brian, can I hate to do that. I always put you on the spot. Sorry. Is there all your years when you worked at Walmart, is there an example of some of this that you just walked through? Or like the fat fingered example or whatever, and then where the automation came into play and improved things. Any kind of example like that at Walmart when you were there, or any other client, just to share like a real world example?
Oh, sure. So at Walmart, I actually worked on the team that was responsible for deploying servers across all of the Walmart environment. So every store, which was about, I think, 3,500 worldwide. And there was actually a process to migrate from AIX systems to Linux. And so what we put in place from an automation standpoint was a continuous delivery tool that allowed us to remediate issues. And so actually a security professional actually fat fingered the password to our systems, and we actually had a process, automated process to cycle each of the systems and reset the password. And so what happened was he actually did not have the correct password, so no one knew it. And so with the delivery automation in place, it was very simple to essentially send out a new change through the software to remediate that issue. And so you hear about similar things happening all the time. I think one of the issues with that happened a while back with Amazon that locked everyone out of their accounts was related to a fat finger issue. And so when those things happen, it's really advantageous for you to have some continuous delivery solution in place so that you can remediate them even faster. So the cost avoidance is immeasurable when you're dealing with this level of automation.
Good stuff. Thanks.
So continuous delivery really allows some of the leading technology companies to deploy much faster. So Amazon says they deploy every 11.7 seconds. That's like insane. But if you think about it, I mean, you're probably talking about over, 10,000 services that are backed by even more applications, right? Probably about, hundreds of applications per service. So when you're dealing with that amount of, those amount of like applications, you'll want to have some type of automated process for delivering those services. Facebook claims that they release between 500 and 700 deployments per day. And I can believe it, right? These are some of the leaders in innovation, and they actually create a lot of processes from the networking stack all the way to deploying the software. So integrating all of those components, when you have your networking engineers working with your software engineers, you can see how you'd be able to create some more streamlined solutions. So here's just a slide here that talks through what the difference is between CI/CD, continuous deployment, and continuous testing. So mainly what I want you guys to get from this is the stages in the DevOps pipeline. These are usually consistent across every organization. And of course, they may vary in terms of what those logic gates or those stages are called. But you typically have a continuous integration process that involves packaging your software. The continuous testing process is included in that generally. And then the delivery process of deploying that software to some environment. Now, an example with Facebook, for instance, they have a web service, right? Facebook.com. But then they also have an app service where you're actually downloading an application from one of the stores, right? App Store, as an example. And so the process to deliver the application service from a continuous delivery standpoint is different from the web service. The web service between the apps, the app that you download. But you can imagine how those two processes would still follow the same stages in order to be released to our customers, right? So visualize that through these diagrams here when we talk about the pipeline components. And then the last stage here is monitoring, and that really just talks about over the life cycle of an application, being able to service it, right, to provide updates if things are broken, or monitoring the service level, right? So just keep that in mind. Now, here's some of the tools that actually help you achieve some of these goals. We don't talk a lot about tools. Again, it's more about process and people. And again, they're tools to really achieve anything or any level of automation. that you want, but you really want to focus on putting the right people in place to select the right tools based on the process that the business provides. And so those challenges are essentially solved using these tools. And some of these, as you can see, like Jenkins, right? Those tools can be used really across continuous testing and delivery. So keep that in mind, that a lot of the tools sort of play across both functional areas or all of the functional areas. And if you guys want to know more, I guess, definitely send me an email and I can provide some information. All right. So due to numerous dependencies to execute code, there's really a huge gap that falls between when we write the code and when it's deployed for the business value. So some of those challenges are seen up front, and leadership has some, sometimes have issues really investing in or seeing the value in automation, because again, you'll have to essentially pay up front to see that value, right? Whether it's through time spent on developing that process, or whether it's actually dollars spent investing in tools that may or may not be used in the long haul. So because of this, a lot of organizations who implement DevOps without a true Agile framework, they will struggle initially. Also, when moving to cloud environments, initially there's a cost to migrating to that environment, but then learning a new software. And so a lot of times organizations are implementing their solutions in the cloud erroneously in their first iteration, but then as they are using Agile to iterate through those fixes, they can release a better product sort of the second go around, where they're taking advantage of some of the cloud and its elasticity, right? And being able to expand, if you will, or decrease their infrastructure or software as their needs grow for their business. Now, here are some of the people that are involved and some of the roles that are involved in creating a DevOps framework or DevOps pipeline. I won't go into detail about each one of those, but just take this slide and really focus on some of the descriptions here around automation engineer. It could be a DevOps or Agile coach in some organizations. But what you'll usually find is a software developer or a DevOps engineer that play multiple roles or multiple hats, depending on the size of the shop. So really more so focus on the description of the roles instead of the roles themselves. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the continuous automation process. And so continuous automation is really the practice of automating every aspect of the application lifecycle. So when we think of continuous automation and we talk about the DevOps pipeline, we have those stages that require us to build and package our software and then deliver it to some environment. Well, when we're thinking about 10,000 to 20,000 applications, we will want them to follow the same exact process. So while there are thousands of applications, we really generally only use a few pieces of software programming languages, right? So we'll have Java, we'll have maybe Python. Groovy is another one. Go, which is Golang, which is the Google language or developed by Google. It's really popular now, right? So you're developing those applications using those tools. And each one of those tools have their own processes for testing or delivering to some pipeline. And so when you have these larger organizations, you really want to create standards around delivering those applications consistently. And that's where continuous automation comes to play. And so when you define what those stages or what those logic gates are for releasing your infrastructure or software, then you want to develop software that manages those components themselves. And that is really where you turn into, DevOps as a service, creating service platforms for, organizations like State Farm, where you're able to collectively onboard thousands of applications in a given quarter. And so those are some of the ways and some of the ways that you would use continuous automation to speed up and make a more efficient product. And speed is usually measured by deployment frequency, and then the time from committing, so making those changes that we talked about and then deploying it. So continuous automation definitely helps with that, and I think you can definitely see how that is the case. And then risk management, which is measured by the quality of the software that you're changing. So compliance and audit frequency is easy to see, right? You have a more of an audit trail because all of the updates come in the form of software. And then efficiency, which is the mean time to recover and the change failure rate. How often am I actually releasing software that needs to be remediated quickly? And so those are some of the benefits that you'll see immediately when you move towards continuous automation. So some of the benefits really of automation and using Agile to sort of drive a lot of the work that's required for automation is that you have smaller code changes, and with that you generally have fewer unintended consequences. So imagine how easy it is if I have a long list of tasks to perform, I'm doing it manually, and I forget what that first or second task was. The same applies for a developer who's making updates to changes. They forget. And so because of that, and if you don't have that automation in place, you can potentially deploy things that are impactful. And so allowing those more senior leaders to provide some code analysis on the software that you're delivering and deploying before you're introducing those risks is where automation comes into play. So again, cost avoidance, remediation, mean time to recover or resolution. These are the things that allow and are beneficial for using and deploying automation along with CI/CD and DevOps. All right, so here's an example of a DevOps application delivery pipeline. And so hopefully you guys can notice here that the goal is to deploy an application to an environment. And if you're using the previous slides where we talked through the DevOps roles, this is where some of those DevOps roles play into providing updates or providing work within that pipeline. So a developer would essentially push some code or some changes, feature or bug fix, and then that software goes through a build process, which involves this testing and possibly deploying a performance test through some lower environment, and then moving it onto production. And so this is, again, an example of application delivery, but the same can be applied to infrastructure delivery as well. And so the organizations that are really thriving at DevOps treat all of their organization services and components as software. And so you can now see how, documentation is handled through software. Now I'm able to properly package and bake in all of the requirements from a security perspective or from a, PCI or compliance perspective into the delivery of an application or service. So here's an example of the infrastructure and application pipeline being delivered together. And so, you guys, if you have any questions, definitely provide, shout me out on LinkedIn or provide. I'll provide my email here, and you guys can definitely send me out an email. And here's the final slide here where we talk through the Scrum process in general. With Agile, we perform the different Agile ceremonies. So we'll have 1 to 4 week sprints, daily stand-ups that act as a way for us to quickly resolve any issues that may have come up, define any stories that need to be prioritized, and really discuss what changes need to be made before our review and our retrospective. And so this is an example of how the business side of planning integrates with a CI/CD pipeline for releasing some software. And again, remember that Agile and DevOps work together, opposed to.
Brian, just a question about that. So you say they work together. Do they both have their items for the backlog in the same backlog, or does the DevOps group, the teams that are working together with the business, do they have their own backlog, or do they share? And I guess I would call those like enablers in terms of maybe some stuff that the DevOps team needs to do.
So they would have they would have the same backlog. So the Agile process would feed work into a DevOps pipeline. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense.
So from a project management perspective, we know that Agile works the best, right? So we want to include that as process deliverables and funnel that into our ability to deliver the technological needs, which in turn is the software and the infrastructure components needed to deploy some service or application. So again, that collection of work is usually done on the Agile side, and it works hand in hand with DevOps because we're now able to apply what we know in the CI/CD from a CI/CD perspective, and then further automate the delivery of each of those components to make our customers happy. All right, so here are a couple resources that I'll leave you guys with. Definitely the Phoenix Project. If you guys are in IT or interested in IT, this is a tell-all book, and probably will speak to a lot of areas in your organization that may need to be looked at and possibly evaluated in a way where DevOps could be advantageous and could act as a way for them to transform their digital operations. And then the DevOps Handbook, also written by Gene Kim and John Willis, who are some of the DevOps evangelists in the field. So definitely check those out if you're looking to get into DevOps and talk a lot about automation and agility as well. So, guys, that's all I had. Really appreciate you guys, Victor, for having us, and look forward to possibly working with you guys in the future.
Awesome, Breon. Thank you so much. I'll turn it over to Shanika.
Thanks, Victor, and thanks, Breon. I guess everyone give a virtual round of applause, I guess emoji in the chat or something. So I guess at this time, really quick, I want to just again give appreciation to Breon taking the time to let's see, you can see this. Sorry, too many monitors. I mean, too many stuff on my screen. The window's in the way. Sorry. But it's minimized. But this right here on the left, just wanted to give us a certificate of appreciation for Breon taking the time to speak with us this week. Also, again, for Matrix, continuing with this series, we have one more session coming up next month, and that'll be the culmination of the series. But thanks again, Breon and Matrix. This time, want to, for those still on the call, wanted to give away an Amazon gift card. So randomly, so basically everyone that kind of stuck around, thanks again. And the random person who picked, let me look at the chat again just to make sure. Probably stop sharing actually, just to make sure it's still there.
Before you announce, Shanika, I'm just kidding. Janet, I see you waving. Before
I
you
got my hair done. I was listening to y'all getting my hair done, y'all.
There you go, and it looks nice.
Thank you.
Before you announce, Shanika, I'm just curious, who wants to win an Amazon gift card? Like, just drop me an emoji if you're interested in winning the gift card. And we try to give something out every session. I see Michelle. Last session we had, which was it was an intro to the pathways for IT session, and we actually gave out 4 free training. So BDP Atlanta sponsored 4 people on the call to participate in their intro to IT training. So it's just going toward the CompTIA Plus. And so we love to try to give away things here. So awesome. All right, Shanika, back to you.
All right, so the random person that I have for this time, and sorry not to call you random, but the person picked is Harvey Dixon. So Harvey, if you can drop your email in the chat, we'll get you that gift card as soon as possible. Thanks, Harvey. Any other words from you, Victor? So as Victor did earlier in the chat, he posted our links to our social media. So I'll redrop those again. Hopefully they're not empty. So redrop those again. I also included the link to our Contact Us page. It's right now a temporary form where you can kind of also include your, I guess, interests. Like, so Victor, when we started off the session, kind of highlighted our STEM program. So for those that are kind of interested in volunteering with the Atlanta chapter or just learning more about our STEM program, you can kind of put your contact details there. In addition, there are links to our social media and our meetup pages. Next session, we have a session coming up, I believe the first Tuesday of November, Tuesday or Wednesday of November, I can't remember. And that is our second session with IM IT training, another pathway to tech session. So the first session, we were able to get a couple students to actually join the upcoming classes in session. So those are CompTIA certification classes that students have started taking. So a lot of good information going around. Can't really think of anything else. Anything on your end, Victor?
Yeah, so we again, thank you all for joining us. Please share the information. We did do a live stream. This was our first one. We had to test it out on Zoom. So we did a live stream via YouTube of this. So we just encourage you to continue to stay in contact. Reach out to Shanika, Atobri, or I if you're interested in doing more. And again, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. You all have a great evening.
Thanks, guys. It was fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Enjoyed this.
Great job, Brian. Thanks, Victor. Thanks,
Thanks,
Shanika.
Brian. Thanks, everyone.